Ivonne Baldelli. The story of Ivonne Baldelli is a dark tale of love gone wrong on what seemed to be a slice of paradise. Sometimes, the quest for an earthly utopia can instead plunge someone into a living nightmare with no way out. A crucial element in this descent often lies in the choice of one's companion on that journey. Picking a partner should be approached with great deliberation and care. Sadly, even those we believe to be our closest allies can reveal themselves as heartless predators. Ivonne Baldelli and Brian Brimager's story began like a romantic dream. Ivonne believed she had found her soulmate, someone worth following to the ends of the earth. Yet, early on, her family had strong misgivings about the man she loved, and their disapproval would later prove tragically justified. This disturbing case began unfolding in 2011, when a joyful and love-struck Ivonne set off with Brimager to a tropical island, unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. As fate would have it, Ivonne was unknowingly walking toward her tragic end. Years later, her mutilated remains were found in a swamp, sealed in bags along with the bodies of her beloved pets. Her family fought tirelessly for justice, a pursuit that ultimately claimed the life of another family member. So, who was Ivonne Baldelli? Born Ivonne Olivia Baldelli, née Nayfold, on June 30, 1969, she grew up in a small town in Southern California, known for its sunshine and laid-back charm. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, and she shared a particularly close relationship with her older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Tragedy struck when Ivonne was just 13 years old. Her mother died after a prolonged illness. A year later, her father married Lillian Faust, a compassionate woman who embraced James's children as her own, and the blended family flourished. Ivonne pursued a well-rounded education and dabbled in various career paths, but her heart always belonged to fashion design. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. She dreamed of transforming her passion into a thriving business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Ivonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in February 2007, Ivonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In February 2009, as Ivonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit, tanned, handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself, and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimager was not only seeing Ivonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Ivonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but 2 women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Ivonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Ivonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on a tropical island. Ivonne shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Caranero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Ivonne informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Ivonne sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Ivonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Caranero Island, where they rented a house right on the ocean front. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Ivonne's business also developed very slowly, with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister, Michelle Valenzuela, almost daily, sharing everything. But her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Ivonne hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed, Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Ivonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the U.S. and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Ivonne? Why hadn't she come back, or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages, but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Ivonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Ivonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along and who was pregnant with his child when he and Ivan flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Ivan couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Ivonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Ivonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached. saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous, but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Ivonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Ivonne's phone soon arrived stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Ivonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Ivonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Ivonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Ivonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Ivonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails supposedly sent by Ivonne from Costa Rica in December were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Ivonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return. They would get married and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's independent investigation. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece took matters into their own hands and flew to Panama. There, they enlisted the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned private investigator with expertise in locating missing American citizens abroad. They explained the circumstances of Yvonne's vanishing, along with the narrative provided by Brian. After hearing their account, Winter quickly voiced his fear that Yvonne was likely no longer alive. Drawing on his extensive experience and professional network, Winter decided to apply pressure on the Panamanian authorities while simultaneously bringing international attention to the case. He helped organize a press conference that included members of Yvonne's family, transforming her disappearance into a global news story. In time, her father, stepmother, brother, and other close relatives and friends traveled to Panama to support the investigation and aid in the search. They journeyed to the remote island of Carnero, combing through the area meticulously. However, the thick jungle and swampy terrain, crawling with wildlife, made their search both grueling and unfruitful. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residents. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Brian was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife, Christine, was at work while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Ivonne had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Ivonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Ivonne, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011 contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant, but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Ivonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive: the long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail: Ivonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Ivonne's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Caranaro, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body, along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Ivonne, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Ivonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Ivonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Ivonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using a machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. During the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of dishonesty and cruelty. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Brian ultimately admitted to the crime but claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Ivonne had attacked him first with a knife, which he then used against her. He asserted that everything that followed, dismembering her body, killing the dogs, and concealing the evidence, occurred while he was in a state of shock, insisting he had no recollection of those actions. Nonetheless, his internet search history and efforts to cover his tracks pointed to a clear awareness of what he had done, along with a calculated attempt to construct a false narrative to explain Yvonne's disappearance. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and received a 26-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole in 2035. His background as a Marine was taken into account during sentencing, sparing him a life sentence. Despite the conviction, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, continued to express faith in his innocence and pledged her unwavering support. Moving on to the next case. Mary Agnes Moroney. In November 1930, 2-year-old Mary Agnes Moroney vanished from the busy streets of Chicago on a cold day. Her disappearance puzzled authorities for 93 years, leaving her family heartbroken. This decades-long missing child case was fraught with confusion and uncertainty. Mary Agnes Moroney's mysterious vanishing captured international attention for years. False leads and dead ends prevented her recovery and reunion with her loved ones for nearly a century. However, gradually, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Hello, wonderful viewers, and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we dive into cold cases, baffling mysteries, and eerie stories that keep you awake at night. Today, we'll explore the prolonged search for Mary Agnes Moroney, who disappeared from her Chicago home in 1930 and was never seen again. Despite countless DNA tests, suspicious letters, and reported sightings, her case remained unsolved until 2023, when a woman from California stepped forward with the key to the enduring mystery. Stay tuned as we uncover the startling facts behind Mary's disappearance and the unexpected twist that finally brought closure to her story. Mary Agnes Moroney was born on May 9, 1928, to Catherine and Michael Moroney in Chicago, Illinois. Amid the harsh realities of the Great Depression, the family struggled to make ends meet. Mary had a younger sister, Anastasia, who was just 11 years old at the time. The Moroneys lived in a second-floor apartment above a supermarket located at 5200 Wentworth Avenue. Michael earned a modest weekly wage of only $15 by distributing handbills, and the family was facing significant financial hardship. During these difficult times, a relative of Catherine Moroney took an interest in their situation and reached out to a welfare organization. This led to a public advertisement highlighting their financial struggles. Shortly after, on the evening of Wednesday, May 13, 1930, Edgar Gilpin, a man who described himself as a nurse and philanthropist, responded to the ad. He offered Michael assistance in the form of a suit and a pair of shoes. Since the welfare organization kept the addresses of those in need confidential, the family accepted Gilpin's help through this intermediary. But due to a small error, a mysterious woman learned the Moroney family's address. They had no idea that this seemingly insignificant mistake would trigger a tragic chain of events that would alter their lives for good. On May 14, 1930, Catherine Moroney, who was 17 years old at the time, was at home by herself with Mary Agnes and Anastasia. She heard a knock at the door as she was mopping the floor. When she goes to answer the door, a nicely dressed woman who identified herself as Mrs. Henderson and claimed to be a representative of the social worker who had seen the Moroney family's advertisement for assistance, was standing at the doorstep. She had just brought inside some groceries she had bought from the downstairs grocery store for $2.55. Mary Agnes, who was typically reserved, quickly warmed up to the woman as Catherine described their family's hardship to her. The woman appeared friendly and eager to assist while listening intently. She said her aging husband had passed away, leaving her with a sizable fortune. A child like Mary Agnes was something else she mentioned wanting. She then requested that Mary Agnes be temporarily taken to California with her while assuring Catherine that the young girl would be as chubby as a butterball. Catherine struggled to overcome her unease. She politely turned down the woman's sudden offer, and the woman seemed to have accepted the mother's decision. The woman soon left and assured Catherine she would be back the following day. Catherine asked for her name, and the woman reluctantly identified herself as Julia Otis. Julia gave Catherine $2 and 2 books before she left as a sign of support. The next day, on May 14, 1930, even though it was raining, Julia Otis went back to the Moroney's house. She brought fresh baby clothes this time for Catherine, who was at the time expecting her 3rd child. Later, it was found that Julia had bought these clothes from a department store with a brand new $50 bill. She offered to drive Mary Agnes to a close-by shop so she could buy new clothes and shoes, and claimed to have found her father a better job. Catherine reluctantly agreed to let Mary Agnes go with her because she was appreciative of the woman's generosity and thought of her as a blessing. Julia Otis took little Mary away and left in spite of her sobs and tantrums. The two, however, disappeared without a trace. Catherine and Michael turned to the police for assistance as they searched desperately for their beloved daughter. They searched for traces, but none were discovered. On the same evening, an elderly man in shabby clothing who claimed to be a welfare worker showed up at the Moroney home. Catherine reported him to the police because she was uncomfortable with his presence. The men tried to stop her from making the call through to the police, but failed, and eventually ran away. He was never identified or found. Julia Otis was described by Catherine as a pleasant and attractive woman, around the age of 22, standing at around 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 125 pounds. She spoke with a refined voice and had visible front teeth. Julia was dressed in a gray suit, a gray lace hat, a pearl necklace, and a jeweled wristwatch when they last saw each other. At around 8 p.m. the following day, on May 16th, a letter from Julia Otis arrived at the Moroney residence. The letter was written on letterhead, and the postmark on it showed that it was delivered at 4:30 p.m. It came with a $5 bill and was delivered via special delivery. The letter read, "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time, you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her." She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis. The authorities examined the letter and found that there were deliberate attempts to make the writing appear illiterate. Could the letter's author have been hiding their true educational background on purpose? As word of the letter spread, witnesses soon came forward with stories of a woman who resembled Julia's description. A young girl who resembled Mary Agnes and the woman were spotted together at a store. A witness saw the woman dictating a letter to a store employee. The Moroneys got a second letter from someone named Alice Henderson 2 weeks later. She claimed to be Julia Otis's cousin. Alice stated in her letter that Julia had lost both her husband and her child the year before, and so she had been craving love since her tragic loss. Alice expressed her wish for Julia to change her mind and give Mary Agnes back. She then ceased all correspondence with the family. Authorities eventually found that both letters had identical handwriting. For days after Mary Agnes was kidnapped, on May 19th, Catherine Moroney took matters into her own hands and asked a judge for a warrant, accusing Julia Otis of abducting her first fruit. Both the public and law enforcement were puzzled by this mysterious woman's abduction of Mary Agnes Moroney. Police conducted a thorough search of all the railroad stations in Chicago, hoping to find any sign that Mary Agnes and her family had boarded a train, but it seemed as if they had vanished without a trace. On July 23, 1931, a young girl matching Mary Agnes' description was spotted in Rockford, Illinois. Witnesses saw a 3-year-old white girl with tanned skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes being pushed in a cart by an elderly Native American woman named Martha Thompson. When the Moroney family was alerted and arrived to identify the child, Martha claimed that the girl had been abandoned by her mother, Florence Fuller, and that she was on her way to join a circus with the child. Catherine Moroney, however, was certain the girl was not her daughter. She carefully examined the child, checking her teeth and body to confirm her identity. Both parents were heartbroken when they realized the girl was not Mary Agnes. One key difference was a distinctive red mark on Mary Agnes' arm, something the girl from Rockford did not have. The case of Mary Agnes's disappearance eventually became cold because the investigation yielded no meaningful leads. In the coming years, the Moroney family welcomed another child whom they named Catherine into the world. They then had the good fortune to welcome 5 more boys named Michael Jr., Patrick, George, Harold, and William. When other kids went missing, the media frequently ran stories about Mary Agnes keeping her name in the public eye. When Chicago Daily News reporter Eden Wright came across a picture of the Moroney family, he noticed something important. All of the family members looked alike, which gave him the idea for a story. In an effort to get someone to recognize Mary Agnes, the Chicago Daily News worked with the California newspaper to publish photos of the Moroney family. Soon enough, a Californian man by the name of Everett McClellan came forward in 1952. The men claimed that Anastasia, one of Mary Agnes' sisters, looked so much like his wife that it might have been her picture. The woman, Mary McClellan, was 24 years old and had been adopted in 1930 by Charles and Nora Beck. The teeth, blood type, skull type, fingerprints, and handprints of Mary McClellan appeared to be identical to those of Mary Agnes. However, Mary McClellan lacked 2 things Mary Agnes had. Mary Agnes was born a year later than McClellan, and McClellan did not have Mary Agnes' distinctive hernia scar from a surgical procedure. The newspaper arranged a meeting between Mary McClellan and Catherine on September 4, 1952, but much to everyone's dismay, Catherine Moroney insisted that Mary McClellan was not her lost daughter. Regardless, the women developed a close bond over time. Ultimately, a DNA test carried out in 2008 after Mary McClellan's demise established that she was not Mary Agnes. Mary Agnes' parents, Catherine and Michael, were profoundly affected by the tragic disappearance of their daughter. Michael passed away in 1957 at the age of 58, leaving behind an extraordinary amount of pain brought on by the loss of his dearly loved daughter. Depression plagued Catherine for years as she was consumed by the pain of her daughter's disappearance. She was only 49 years old when she died in 1962, after she had endured her loss all the way to the end. For close to a century, Mary Agnes' case remained a mystery. When Cook County Sheriff's Detective Jose Rodriguez started looking into Mary Agnes' disappearance in 2022 and contacted Terry Arnold, the daughter of a woman he thought was the long-lost Mary Agnes Moroney, the case took a great turn. Detective Rodriguez thought Mary Agnes might actually be Terry's mother based on DNA evidence. When the detective first explained his hypothesis that Jeanette Burchard might actually be Mary Agnes Moroney to Terry Arnold, Terry was doubtful and didn't buy it. She emphasized the absence of Mary Agnes' birthmark and other distinguishing features in her mother. But Terry agreed to take a commercial DNA test in order to disprove the theory and offer concrete proof. On October 28, 2022, the test results were received, and they produced a startling finding. Her genetic makeup, in contrast to Terry's Polish heritage, predominantly revealed Irish ancestry, which was a notable similarity with the Moroney family. The DNA test also established Terry Arnold's relationship to the Moroney family's surviving members as first-line cousins. This coincidental relationship strengthened the notion that Terry's mother was Mary Agnes Moroney. Who was she, though? Her family had been informed that Jeanette Burchard was born on April 14, 1928. She was raised by Jeanette Celeric Darris Anderson and her stepfather, Frank Darris. Detective Rodriguez did not find any obvious abnormalities in Burchard's family during his investigation. However, Terry provided a crucial piece of information. Frank Darris, Terry's step-grandfather, once told Jeanette Burchard that the woman who raised her wasn't her biological mother. Terry also claimed that her mother attempted to find out more about her true ancestry by contacting her Chicago-based cousins, but they claimed to be unaware of the situation. However, it was later discovered that before getting married to Frank Darris, the woman who raised Jeanette had a brief relationship with a man by the name of John Fahey. Fahey and the woman, along with Jeanette Burchard, were listed as residing in the same Chicago home in the 1930 census. After getting married to Darris, the family moved to Virginia in the early 1930s. Later, during World War II, they moved to Florida. Jeanette Burchard wed Edward Jennings in the 1940s, and the two of them had two children named Barbara Joan Jennings and Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. After starting her career as a nurse, Jeanette gave birth to Terry Arnold, her third child, in 1957. A few decades later, she wed Earl Burchard a second time. The Miami Dolphins were Jeanette's favorite team, and she supported them from the time they were founded in 1966 throughout her entire life. Jeanette was a nurse, but she also had a great love for animals, especially dogs and cats. She also loved opera, with Madame Butterfly being a particular favorite. According to Terry, the last time her mother visited Chicago was probably between 1989 and 1995, possibly for a funeral. She later died in Florida in February 2003, and her remains were buried alongside her pets. A year later, her son, Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. died. Her daughter, Barbara Joan Jennings, soon passed away in 2006 too. Terry Arnold, the only surviving child of Jeanette Burchard, firmly believes that Mary Agnes Moroney is indeed her mother, whom she has always known as Jeanette Burchard. In an interview, Terry admitted that she had no knowledge of the name Julia Otis or the reasons why her grandmother ended up raising her mother. She remains unaware of the full details behind this mystery. However, Terry expressed deep sympathy for Mary Agnes's parents, acknowledging that they never received closure or the truth about what truly happened to their daughter. She assured the Moroney family that, despite the unanswered questions, Jeanette Burchard, Mary Agnes to Terry, was deeply loved. Mary Agnes Moroney was the focus of a relentless search spanning decades after her disappearance in 1930. This painful chapter that haunted the Moroney family for nearly a century finally reached a resolution in 2023. Yet one question remains unanswered. Who was Julia Otis, and what drove her to abduct young Mary Agnes from her devoted family? Some answers may never be uncovered. Moving on to the next case. Pamela Mastropietro. Addiction is a destructive and deeply pervasive condition that not only devastates the life of the person suffering from it, but also inflicts lasting pain on their loved ones. Like any serious illness, it demands prompt and professional treatment before the consequences become irreversible. The tragic case of 18-year-old Pamela Mastropietro, which unfolded in Italy in February 2018, horrified the country due to its extreme brutality. The incident nearly sparked widespread social unrest and provoked racially motivated violence, with innocent black migrants attacked simply for their ethnicity. More bloodshed was narrowly avoided by chance. Pamela was born on August 23, 1999, in Rome, Italy, the only child of Alessandra Verni and Stefano Mastropietro. She was raised in an educated and financially secure household. Her parents ran a successful business and did their best to provide her with every opportunity. However, their demanding work schedules often meant they had limited time to spend with her. From an early age, Pamela exhibited signs of unusual behavior. She was extremely shy, withdrawn, and avoided social situations. Pamela's parents initially dismissed her early signs of shyness and withdrawal, assuming she would grow out of them once she started school and formed friendships. However, These traits only intensified over time. Throughout her school years, Pamela found it increasingly difficult to socialize and connect with her peers. Though teachers acknowledged her intelligence and potential, they noted her deep lack of self-confidence. She also suffered from acute anxiety, frequent sleep problems, and a range of fears, prompting her parents to consult a specialist for help. Pamela was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She often misplaced her trust in others, failed to recognize potential dangers, and displayed an almost absent sense of self-preservation. As she grew older, her struggles with mental health became more visible and severe. By the time she was 11, her family was under considerable strain, with her parents, Alessandra and Stefano, nearing the point of divorce. This turmoil deeply affected Pamela, leading to a diagnosis of depression. Although her parents eventually managed to resolve their differences and preserve their marriage, Pamela's condition did not improve. 2 years later, she was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder, yet she continued attending regular school despite her struggles to fit in socially. To keep up with her studies, Pamela relied heavily on prescribed medications which her mother closely monitored. Alessandra held on to hope that her daughter might grow out of her mental health issues. But Pamela's academic performance declined steadily, and her behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. Pamela blossomed into a striking young woman with a model-like figure and captivating features. By her teenage years, she began attracting attention from young men, but had no idea how to handle their advances. Her trusting and naive nature persisted, making her susceptible to manipulative individuals and questionable invitations. This ultimately led her to fall in with a dangerous crowd. Pamela's lack of confidence and susceptibility made her prone to experimentation. She was introduced to alcohol and later to prohibited substances at an early age. Her mental health struggles often clouded her judgment, and she became vulnerable in her relationships. Her psychiatrist would later testify in court that Pamela was often incapable of fully understanding her actions or providing informed consent, leaving her exposed to exploitation. Under the influence of substances or alcohol, Pamela felt more self-assured, carefree, and happy. These fleeting moments of relief quickly spiraled into a serious dependency. At the age of 15, Pamela was admitted to a private rehabilitation center, where her parents hoped she could overcome her growing addiction. The treatment was initially successful, and a few months later, she returned to school, seemingly free from her previous dependencies. She managed to maintain her progress for over a year until, at 17, she met a 20-year-old Romanian man named Claudio Nitu. He quickly earned her trust, and they began a relationship. Under his influence, Pamela returned to substance use, abandoned her studies, and began running away from home. Her dependencies not only resurfaced, but intensified significantly. Claudio ultimately convinced her to engage in dangerous activities, including exploiting her own body to fund their growing substance use. When the Mastropietros learned about Pamela's situation, they contacted the police. Claudio attempted to flee, but was quickly located and arrested. He was later sentenced to 4 years in prison for influencing a minor to use alcohol and potent substances, as well as for coercing her into engaging in illicit activities. In mid-October 2017, Pamela's parents decided to send her to another rehabilitation clinic. This time, they chose to remove her from Rome entirely, aiming to isolate her from the influences and connections that had enabled her substance use. To achieve this, Alessandra and Stefano selected a treatment center located in the small town of Maserati. The program at this facility came with a steep price tag, but her parents spared no expense, determined to give Pamela every chance to recover. The treatment plan was scheduled to last 3 months and included individual and group therapy with psychologists, as well as care from addiction specialists. After completing the program, Pamela was expected to return to a dependency-free, stable life. The Mastropietros believed the clinic's high cost would ensure their daughter was under constant supervision and protected from any opportunity to access harmful substances. However, the clinic staff and security were neglectful of their responsibilities. Patients were often able to leave the premises freely, violating curfews, purchasing prohibited substances, and engaging in risky behaviors. Pamela initially seemed to make progress, staying at the clinic for about 2 months. She claimed to feel much better as the support and community of individuals with similar struggles gave her hope. But this same community, combined with the lack of proper oversight, ultimately worked against her. By early January 2018, as her rehabilitation program neared its end, Pamela began leaving the clinic to obtain and use substances again. With no intervention from the staff, her dependency, which she had fought so hard to overcome, returned with renewed intensity. Strangely, her treating physician failed to notice the relapse, setting the stage for what would become a tragic series of events. On January 29, 2018, Pamela's parents received a call from the rehabilitation center. They were informed that their daughter was missing, having allegedly escaped the facility. However, a closer investigation revealed a very different story. An inspection of her room and security camera footage showed that Pamela had calmly packed all her belongings into a suitcase and walked out through the main entrance. No one at the clinic stopped her or even asked where she was going. Pamela's companions at the rehabilitation center later revealed that she had recently started using substances more frequently, purchasing them from dealers outside the facility. She had also spoken about her intention to leave what she believed to be ineffective treatment and return to Rome. It was likely this destination she had in mind when she left the clinic, but she never boarded a train, didn't return home, and hadn't been seen or heard from by anyone she knew since. Understandably, Alessandra and Stefano were distraught and determined not to let their daughter's disappearance go unresolved. They filed a missing persons report with the police and enlisted the help of the media. The couple appeared on a local Macerata TV station, appealing to the public for any information that could help find their daughter. They offered a significant reward for any credible leads, but for the first 2 days, no substantial updates emerged. On January 31st, a distressed man called the police, reporting that 2 suspicious suitcases emitting a foul odor had been dumped in a ditch near his home. Fearing they might contain something dangerous, he refrained from touching or opening them. The caller lived in a suburban area of Macerata, just a few miles from the rehabilitation center where Pamela had disappeared days earlier. Law enforcement, accompanied by bomb disposal experts, arrived at the scene, cordoned off the area, and carefully inspected the suitcases to ensure they contained no explosives. Once deemed safe, the suitcases were opened, and what they found inside shocked even seasoned investigators. The dismembered remains of a young woman had been packed into the luggage, soaked in a corrosive chemical solution. Police immediately suspected the remains belonged to Pamela, but definitive confirmation required further analysis. They showed the suitcases to her parents, who identified one as belonging to their daughter. Tragically, Pamela's body could only be officially identified through DNA testing due to the severe damage and disfigurement. Determining the cause of death proved challenging, given the state of the remains. To complicate matters further, the perpetrator had soaked the body parts in a bleach-like chemical, likely in an attempt to destroy traces of their DNA. This process had caused the horrid stench of decomposing tissue mixed with harsh cleaning agents that initially drew attention to the suitcases. The next step for investigators was to trace Pamela's movements after she left the rehabilitation center. Security footage from street cameras showed her walking toward a nearby public transportation stop, where she appeared to be flagging down passing vehicles. About 15 minutes later, a taxi pulled over. Pamela exchanged a few words with the driver before getting into the car. The trail of the car Pamela entered vanished once it moved beyond the reach of street surveillance, but investigators were able to trace the vehicle by its license plate. The taxi driver was soon located, and when shown Pamela's photograph, he immediately recognized her. His version of events introduced a disturbing new dimension to the case. He recounted that a young woman carrying a suitcase had approached him at a bus stop that evening, requesting a ride to the train station. She had planned to catch a train to Rome, but upon learning that the last train had already left, she told him she would wait overnight at the station for the next one. The driver admitted that he suggested she come to his home instead, and to his surprise, she agreed without hesitation. He confessed they had a sexual encounter, claiming it was consensual. The next morning, Pamela reportedly said she was feeling unwell and asked to be dropped off at a nearby park rather than returning to the train station. The driver suspected she might be experiencing withdrawal symptoms, especially since the park she mentioned was known locally as a spot where undocumented migrants sold illegal substances. Nevertheless, he chose not to intervene and left her there, as requested. That, he claimed, was the last time he saw her. The driver's story and alibi were quickly verified. He had indeed dropped Pamela off at the park before continuing his work. While he was cleared of any suspicion in the crime, Pamela's parents later attempted to hold him accountable for what they deemed an exploitative encounter, arguing that their daughter's condition rendered her incapable of giving informed consent. However, the court ruled in the driver's favor, acquitting him of all charges. In the park, Pamela encountered a man known as Desmond, a Nigerian national involved in selling substances. He was a familiar figure in certain circles and had been on law enforcement's radar. Thanks to police informants, Desmond was swiftly identified and arrested on suspicion of involvement in Pamela's death. During questioning, Desmond admitted to selling Pamela a dose of a prohibited substance for which she had paid with a necklace. However, he insisted that after their exchange, she left and that he had no connection to her death. Although his account was corroborated, Desmond remained in custody due to pending charges for distributing substances and residing in Italy without documentation. His potential involvement in the crime or in covering up evidence was not ruled out. Approximately 15 minutes after Pamela purchased the substance, security footage captured her entering a nearby pharmacy. She bought a single-use syringe and left shortly after. However, the footage also showed another man entering and exiting the pharmacy around the same time. He appeared to maintain a distance, but seemed to know Pamela. The man was later identified as Innocent Osagiel, a 30-year-old undocumented immigrant from Nigeria, also involved in the sale of substances. Innocent quickly became a key suspect in the investigation into Pamela's death. Law enforcement obtained his address from Desmond, who had been offered a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. Innocent Osagiel lived in a troubled neighborhood just a few blocks from the park where Pamela had last been seen. Investigators speculated that she might have gone to his home to use the substances she had purchased. A police unit was dispatched to the address, but no one was home. However, law enforcement had already obtained the necessary warrants to search the premises, which they suspected could be the scene of a serious crime. During the search, officers discovered multiple blood stains that appeared to have been poorly cleaned. They also found women's clothing matching the description of what Pamela had been wearing. Testing confirmed the blood belonged to Pamela, and her parents identified the clothing as hers, recognizing it from the suitcase where her remains had been found. In the bathroom, investigators discovered more blood traces and 4 empty bottles of chlorine bleach. These findings erased any doubt that the crime had been committed there. Forensic specialists theorized that Innocent had lured Pamela to his home, where they used substances together. He may have then subjected her to intimate aggression and decided to end her life afterward. The dismemberment and bleaching of her remains were likely attempts to eliminate his DNA. Nearby, surveillance cameras captured Innocent sneaking toward the ditch, where the suitcases containing Pamela's remains were later discovered. However, he wasn't alone. Footage revealed that he arrived in a car driven by another man, with a third person in the vehicle. This indicated that multiple individuals might have been involved in the disposal of evidence. The car was soon traced to a friend of Desmond's, a man named Lucky Avalamo, who was arrested the same day. Investigators determined that Lucky had been driving the vehicle used to transport the suitcases. Alongside Lucky and Innocent, Desmond was also in the car, although he initially tried to deny his involvement. Confronted with evidence, both accomplices provided the suspected location of Innocent, but claimed they didn't know what was inside the suitcases. They insisted they were merely helping Innocent dispose of what he described as trash. Innocent was arrested on February 2, 2018. As expected, he denied any wrongdoing and instead offered a bizarre and implausible version of events. He claimed that he had met Pamela in the park after she purchased substances and was looking for a secluded place to use them. He said he invited her to his home, and she agreed. On their way to his home, Pamela and Innocent stopped at a pharmacy where she purchased a syringe. Once at his apartment, Pamela took the first dose, but complained that it didn't have the desired effect. She asked for more, but with no money left, she allegedly offered to pay Innocent with physical intimacy. He agreed. After the second dose, they were intimate. But shortly afterward, Pamela began gasping for air, experiencing convulsions, and lost consciousness. Within minutes, she showed no signs of life. Innocent claimed Pamela had died from an overdose. Panicked and fearing that the blame would fall entirely on him, he decided to dispose of her body. He explained that cutting it into parts, placing it in suitcases, and discarding it outside the city seemed like the best plan at the time. He used chemicals to destroy his DNA, believing no one would accept that their intimacy was consensual and initiated by her as payment for the substances. When asked about the involvement of his associates, Lucky and Desmond, Innocent changed his story. He alleged that they had arrived at his apartment shortly after he and Pamela had taken the substances. He claimed he passed out, and when he woke up, his friends told him Pamela was dead. They allegedly proposed disposing of her remains by dismembering and packing them into suitcases. Verifying Innocent's statements proved difficult, as he had indeed destroyed much of the evidence. However, investigators soon discovered critical new clues. Innocent had overlooked one detail: the victim's hands. Forensic experts found traces of his skin cells under Pamela's nails, indicating that she had fought back and scratched her attacker. As for Desmond and Lucky, they denied being at Innocent's apartment during the crime. Both provided alibis linked to their illicit substance trade, reasoning that such confessions would result in lighter sentences compared to being charged with assault or involvement in a violent crime. Their alibis were corroborated, but questions remained about their knowledge of the gruesome contents of the suitcases they helped transport. While all three suspects were in custody, forensic teams continued examining Pamela's remains to determine the cause of death. Toxicology reports revealed high levels of prohibited substances in her system, but the amounts were not fatal and unlikely to have caused her death. Further examination uncovered 2 penetrating wounds on her right side, inflicted while she was still alive. Her liver had sustained severe damage, and it was evident that she had died from these injuries due to significant blood loss. The dismemberment occurred several hours after her death. During subsequent interrogations, Desmond and Lucky admitted that Innocent had spoken to them about a woman whose incapacitated state he had taken advantage of while she was unconscious from substance use. They believed this woman was Pamela, but claimed they had no knowledge of what happened to her afterward. For over 6 months, the investigation into Pamela's death made little progress. Authorities lacked sufficient evidence to bring the case to trial, even as Innocent Osegal remained the prime suspect. In a bold move, investigators planted an informant in his cell to gain his trust and extract a confession. The strategy worked. Innocent struck up a friendship with his cellmate and eventually admitted that he had noticed an attractive young woman behaving strangely in the park. According to him, she was so trusting that she agreed to accompany him to his home and accepted substances from him without questioning their contents. When the woman became unconscious, Innocent decided to exploit her vulnerability, viewing it as payment for the dose since she had no money. However, Pamela regained consciousness, began to resist, scratched him, and threatened to call the police. This enraged Innocent, who grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the liver. Moments later, Pamela became still and appeared to stop breathing. Assuming she was dead, Innocent quickly devised a plan to dispose of her body in a suitcase. Realizing the body wouldn't fit, he decided to dismember it. As he started with her limbs, Pamela unexpectedly regained consciousness, screaming and crying for help. Panicking, he stabbed her again in the liver, this time delivering a fatal wound. The informant recorded Innocent's confession, making it a pivotal piece of evidence. The informant later became a key witness during the trial. Additionally, Lucky Avelemo came forward, revealing that Innocent had called him, presumably during the attack, asking for help disposing of trash. Lucky admitted hearing faint cries in the background, but dismissed them as noise from the television. The trial for Innocent Osegal, Desmond Lucky, and Lucky Avelemo began in February. By then, prosecutors had amassed substantial evidence proving Innocent's guilt. Toxicology reports confirmed that Pamela had not died from a substance overdose, as Innocent had claimed. The cause of death was 2 deep stab wounds to her liver, which caused fatal blood loss. Furthermore, forensic evidence revealed that the dismemberment began while she was still alive. In May 2019, Innocent Osegal was convicted of committing non-consensual acts of an intimate nature against Pamela, who was in a vulnerable state due to her mental health and substance use. He was also found guilty of a violent crime, desecration of her body, and attempting to destroy evidence. Innocent received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. All of Innocent Osgale's appeals were ultimately rejected. The case triggered widespread outrage both within Italy and internationally, reigniting fierce debates around immigration, criminal justice, and the protection of society's most vulnerable. Osgale's actions, combined with his status as an undocumented migrant, intensified public discourse surrounding the responsibilities of host countries in managing migrant populations and addressing systemic gaps that allow such crimes to occur. Although there was no direct evidence implicating Desmond or Lucky in the violent crime itself, the court found that they likely knew the contents of the suitcases and understood why Osgale had instructed them to dispose of them in a ditch outside the city. As a result, they were not charged as accomplices to the murder, but were instead convicted of drug-related offenses. Both received 5-year prison sentences for distributing illegal substances. The murder of Pamela Mastropietro received massive media attention and ignited a surge of public anger, much of it directed toward black migrants. In one particularly disturbing act of retaliation, an Italian man named Luca Traini armed himself with a handgun and opened fire on a bus carrying African passengers. 6 innocent people were wounded, and it was only through sheer luck that no fatalities occurred. Traini was apprehended shortly after the attack and admitted his actions were a form of revenge, though he expressed no remorse. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Moving on to the next case. Brittany McGlone. 19-year-old Brittany McGlone lived in East Texas in February 2007. She worked 2 jobs to save money for college, planning to attend Baylor University to study nursing. One of her jobs was at the Lowe's distribution center in Mount Vernon. On the morning of May 4, 2007, after finishing her overnight shift, Brittany drove to her boyfriend Jeff Stogner's house in Winsboro, Texas, to get some sleep. At the time, Jeff and his family, who also lived there, were away giving someone a ride to the airport. Brittany's mother tried calling her multiple times that day but received no response. Concerned, she reached out to Jeff, who had just returned home. He told her that Brittany's car was still in the driveway before they ended the call. Jeff went into the house, found Brittany's body on his bed, and called 911. She'd been assaulted and beaten with an unknown object. An autopsy ruled that the cause was massive head trauma. Many people were questioned by detectives, including Jeff and his family, but no suspects have been publicly named. Brittany's sister, Hope, had a lot to say about Brittany's character. No matter what kind of day she was having, Brittany could always find the silver lining. Her bright smile, goofy sense of humor, and positive outlook on life would spread to the one she was with, making it impossible for anyone to have a bad day. She didn't deserve this, Hope said. She was this innocent, pure person who never did anything wrong, never got into trouble. She always saw the good in people and just loved life. Why would someone do this to her? Hope has publicly said that her family have their theories about who took Brittany's life, but remain open to any and all possibilities. Among the possibilities is a man known by Jeff Stogner's family, who was questioned early in the investigation. The man has a lengthy criminal record with prior charges for burglary, assault, and assault with a weapon. In 2021, Wood County Sheriff Kelly Cole said there is plenty of evidence, like bloodstains and DNA, from the scene that they plan to retest now the DNA technology is more advanced. On September 1st, 2022, the Wood County Sheriff's Office in Texas shared an update on Facebook regarding Brittany's case. They announced that on August 31st, an arrest warrant had been obtained, leading Captain Mike Chilson and Ranger John Vance to travel to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where they arrested Chad Earl Carr. Brittany's family had long suspected Carr's involvement. He is currently being held in the Wood County Jail with bond set at $1 million. Following the arrest, Brittany's family expressed their emotions in a Facebook post, stating, "Never did I think this day would come. 15 years later, and it has." They also took a moment to thank Sheriff Cole. However, they emphasized that this was only the beginning. Moving on to the next case. Flora Stevens. In 1975, 36-year-old Flora Stevens lived in Sullivan County, New York. She worked at the Concord Hotel and was married to Robert Stevens. On August 3rd of that year, Robert dropped her off at Community General Hospital in Monticello, New York, for a doctor's appointment. However, When he returned to pick her up, Flora was nowhere to be found. After searching for her without success, Robert reported her missing. Over the years, detectives periodically revisited the case, but no significant leads ever emerged. In February, the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office received a call from a New York State Police investigator regarding unidentified skeletal remains found in southern Orange County. The woman's remains bore a resemblance to Flora's general description, leading the investigator to seek DNA from any surviving relatives for identification. Instead, investigators uncovered a surprising clue. Someone in Massachusetts had been using Flora's social security number. Detectives tracked down the social security number to an assisted living facility in Lowell, Massachusetts. Staff at the facility confirmed that the number belonged to Flora Harris, who had been at the facility since February 2001. Investigators decided to go talk to 78-year-old Flora, but found she suffers from dementia and is unable to speak more than 1 or 2 words at a time. She did recognize her ID from the Concord Hotel as her own. Officials were able to trace Flora's medical records back about 30 years and learned she spent time in a nursing home in New Hampshire and at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in Manhattan. Due to her illness, the circumstances surrounding Flora's disappearance from Monticello in 1975, as well as where she went afterward, remain a mystery. Adding to the challenge, authorities have been unable to find any living relatives. When shown a photograph of herself as a young woman, Flora responded, "Me," and when presented with a picture of her husband, Robert, she recognized him by name. This confirmed to investigators that Flora Stevens and Flora Harris were indeed the same person. As for Robert, he sadly never learned the truth about his wife's disappearance, and he has since passed away. Moving on to the next case. Richie Edwards. Richard Edwards, commonly known as Richie, was born in Blackwood, Wales, in 1967. He gained recognition in 1989 when he joined the Welsh alternative rock band Manic Street Preachers as their 4th member, initially working with them as a driver and roadie. Though he lacked notable musical ability, Richie became renowned as the band's primary lyricist, with his writing described as dark and intellectually driven. He often mimed playing rhythm guitar during performances and was responsible for approximately 80% of the lyrics on the band's 3rd album, The Holy Bible. In The Independent, journalist Ed Power portrayed Richie as the emotional core and wounded spirit of the band. Despite the acclaim the group received and Richie's own artistic success, he faced significant personal struggles. He was candid about his severe depression and tendency towards self-harm, once explaining that it provided him with a sense of relief. A notable incident occurred in May 1991 when an NME journalist questioned his dedication to his art. In response, the 24-year-old carved the words "for real" into his forearm with a razor. The injury required 18 stitches, and the photo of Richie displaying the wound remains one of his most iconic images. Alongside his struggles with depression and self-harm, Richie also battled an eating disorder and chronic insomnia, often using alcohol as a sleep aid. Just before the release of the band's 3rd album in 1994, he voluntarily admitted himself to a hospital, which caused him to miss much of the album's promotional activities. After being discharged, he went on tour with the band one final time. His last performance with the Manic Street Preachers took place in London on December 21, 1994, concluding with the band wrecking their instruments and damaging the venue's lighting system. Richie initiated the destruction by smashing his guitar during the final song of the night. On January 23, 1995, he sat for what would be his last interview. In the lead-up to that, he had spoken openly in other interviews about his feelings of emotional isolation and failed romantic connections, expressing a belief that he was fundamentally unlovable. He once said, "I've never had any long relationship. The longest when I was young was about 4 days. Since the band started, I've only really been involved with one girl. I can speak to her more naturally than to anyone else. It means something, but I've never told her I love her. I've known her for years, but I've only kissed her once, twice. That's all. How can I explain? When I love somebody, I feel sort of trapped." Richie was also known to have commented on where his life went wrong, citing comprehensive school as the problem. "Up to the age of 13, I was ecstatically happy. People treated me very well. My dog was beautiful. I lived with my nan and she was beautiful. School's nothing. You go there, come back, and just play football in the fields. Then I moved from my nans and started a comprehensive school, and everything started going wrong. In my 20s, there's nothing that's been that spectacular since. Richie's date of disappearance is February 1st, 1995. That day, he and James Dean Bradfield, lead guitarist and singer for the Manic Street Preachers, were due to fly to the U.S. to promote the band's most recent album. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Richie withdrew a total of £800. The reason for the cash withdrawals is unknown even today. There is some speculation he planned to spend the money in the U.S., while it's also been suggested that he was going to use it to pay for a new desk he'd ordered. However, the desk was worth only half of the money he'd withdrawn and was never actually purchased. At 7 o'clock on the morning of February 1st, Richie checked out of the Embassy Hotel on Bayswater Road, leaving behind his toiletries, packed suitcase, and some of his Prozac. He took with him only a little of his Prozac, his wallet, car keys, and passports. Richie subsequently left for his flat in Cardiff, where he would leave his passport, Prozac, and a toll booth receipt for the Severn Bridge, which runs between England and Wales. He was never seen alive again, and what became of him has been one of music's most saddening mysteries. On February 14th, Richie's vehicle, a Vauxhall Cavalier, received a parking ticket at the Severn View service station. 3 days later, the car was found abandoned here, close to the Severn Bridge. A toll booth seats found inside the vehicle showed he'd crossed the bridge at what was initially thought to be 2:55 p.m. However, the entire timeline of events was thrown into question when it was revealed in 2018 that he'd crossed the bridge at 2:55 a.m. and that the tolling system used a 24-hour clock. The Vauxhall's battery was found dead, and there were signs suggesting someone had been living in the car. Given that the Severn Bridge was notorious as a suicide location, many speculated that Richie may have taken his own life. However, despite his well-documented mental health struggles, Richie had publicly dismissed the idea of suicide in 1994. He stated, "In terms of the S word, that does not enter my mind, and it never has done in terms of an attempt because I am stronger than that. I might be a weak person, but I can take pain." Since his disappearance, numerous alleged sightings of Richie have surfaced from locations as far apart as Goa, India, the Canary Islands, and Newport, England. Just days after he went missing, a fan of the Manic Street Preachers claimed to have seen Richie at both the Newport bus station and the Newport passport office. At the time, she was unaware he had been reported missing and later shared the encounter with a friend. On February 7th, 6 days after Richie vanished, a Newport taxi driver reported picking up a man he believed to be Richie from the King's Hotel. The man asked to be driven around his hometown of Blackwood and nearby areas. The driver noted that the passenger spoke in a Cockney accent, which occasionally shifted into a Welsh one. When they arrived at Blackwood bus station, the man changed his mind and instead asked to be taken to Pontypool railway station. He ultimately left the cab at the Severn View service station near the village of Aust, South Gloucestershire, and paid the fare in cash. This service station is the same one where his car was later ticketed. None of these sightings, however, have ever been confirmed by investigators. The investigation into Richie's disappearance has also been heavily criticized over the last few decades. Music journalist Simon Price, who wrote a book in 1999 about the Manic Street Preachers, noted that the inquiry was far from satisfactory, adding that Richie's younger sister, Rachel, hid out at police handling of the case when CCTV footage possibly linked the 27-year-old's disappearance was not analyzed until 2 years after he went missing. Rachel herself has spoken with numerous outlets stating that the police did not appear to take her brother's disappearance seriously, believing that he was a fame-hungry was certified as high risk given his psychiatric problems, yet there was never any helicopter or river searches. The people who last saw him were never interviewed. There wasn't a searches. The people who last saw him were never interviewed. There wasn't a DNA sample on file until 2005, and even then I had to instigate the submission of this to their database. Rachel noted that the investigation was often hindered by poor communication and a lack of consistency, with 3 different police forces involved and little coordination between them. She mentioned that it was frequently difficult to contact investigators and that the family received few updates. In 2019, a book titled Withdrawn Traces, Searching for the Truth about Richie Manic was published with Rachel's cooperation. The book revealed that Richie had been fascinated by disappearances from a young age. It also mentioned that during his hospital stay in 1994, he met a woman who later relocated to Israel, and that he had spoken of going there himself not long before vanishing. The book further speculated that Richie may have had undiagnosed Asperger's syndrome and possibly orchestrated his own disappearance as a way to retreat from a world he found overwhelming. In 2008, Richie was officially declared presumed dead, allowing his family to settle his personal matters. His father passed away in 2013, followed by his mother in 2019. Despite their deaths, his sister continues to advocate for him and regularly brings attention to his case to keep his memory alive. Given Richie's enduring cult status among fans of alternative rock and the Manic Street Preachers, it's unlikely he will ever be truly forgotten. Moving on to the next case. Sydney Irene Loofe. Imagine for a moment that today we're heading not to a Hollywood film set, but to Wilbur, Nebraska, where, instead of a glamorous movie production, our story unfolds like a chilling thriller. Nebraska, part of the Great Plains, lies within Tornado Alley. During the spring and summer months, the region frequently experiences powerful thunderstorms and tornadoes. Uniquely, Nebraska is the only landlocked tri-state, meaning that to reach the ocean, a bay, or a gulf, you must travel through at least 3 other states. It's the kind of place where most motorists prefer not to stop along dark country roads. But for Michael, a flat tire left him no choice. Forced to pull over on a desolate highway, he stepped out of his car. While inspecting the vehicle, something nearby caught his eye: a large black trash bag lying just off the road, its shape oddly irregular. Curious and uneasy, Michael returned to his car, grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, and shined it toward the bag. The bag had been torn open. A dark stain marked the ground beneath it. Something had clearly leaked out. Faint, light-colored material peeked through the holes in the plastic. As Michael moved in for a closer look, he froze in horror. Protruding from the bag was a human hand. His call to emergency services set off a chain reaction that roused the entire town. Within minutes, investigators arrived at the remote stretch of highway and began a meticulous search of the scene. They quickly confirmed that the bag did, in fact, contain human remains. The evidence was carefully collected and sent for forensic analysis, while search teams expanded their efforts in the surrounding area. Before long, the remains were successfully identified. The victim was 24-year-old Sydney Irene Loofe. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Loofe. Sydney's family moved to Neligh in February, at which time she was in 2nd grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofes were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loofe didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loofe had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loofe's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16th, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menards store where she worked at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they have conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loofe's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos. One on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loofe's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture caption, "Ready for my date?" Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive. But no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend, Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, After losing her father, her life changed direction. And after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took several days, but police eventually tracked down the couple connected to the case. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were located at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, where they were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was first reported missing, investigators, using cell phone data and Bailey's location history, made a grim discovery: Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered into 14 parts. 13 of those were found stuffed into black plastic garbage bags and discarded in ditches throughout Clay County. Disturbingly, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. It was a scene of unimaginable horror. In total, authorities identified 16 crime scenes tied to Sydney's remains or her personal effects. Her car keys, driver's license, and phone case were recovered along the highway, each location aligning perfectly with the movements of Boswell and Trail. Forensic experts performed autopsies on the 13 recovered body parts. Their findings revealed abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, as well as bruises and scrapes on her back, clear signs that she had fought desperately for her life. The tragic discovery sent shockwaves through not only Sydney Loofe's loved ones, but across the entire state of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loofe family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church she had attended throughout her life. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were formally charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey entered a plea of not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to murder and conspiracy, but admitted guilt in the charge of improper disposal. As the investigation unfolded, Aubrey's statements continuously shifted. Each deposition contradicted the last. He altered the timeline, changed the details, and introduced new individuals, creating an ever-growing web of inconsistencies. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loofe, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, A surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours. But the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loofe's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered, she was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She liked to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder, and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase, and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loofe. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017, and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch. But in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship, and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The three of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing, said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in a Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body. And as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. For 3 long years, the Loofe family mourned the loss of Sydney, holding on to hope for justice and a sense of closure. On July 11, 2019, their wait came to an end. A jury took less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and improper disposal of human remains. The 3-judge panel overseeing sentencing described his actions as cold, calculated, and deeply disturbing. In the penalty phase that followed, county prosecutors fulfilled their promise to seek the ultimate punishment. Aubrey Trail was sentenced to death, and on June 9, 2021, he was executed by lethal injection. Trail, a known con artist, had allegedly manipulated members of his so-called cult into believing he was a flying, mind-reading vampire who led a coven of witches. He claimed these witches would gain their powers by taking human lives. But in reality, not fantasy, justice prevailed. And in this tragic yet powerful story, the legal system brought an end to the horrors inflicted by a man whose delusions were matched only by his cruelty. Moving on to the next case. The Lamesh family. Thanksgiving was just 2 days away, and the Lamesh family had meticulously planned everything: the turkey, the side dishes, and a gathering with loved ones. But this year's celebration held even greater significance. Melissa Lamesh, a 27-year-old EMT, was preparing for an even more momentous event, meeting her son, Barrett, in just 48 hours. She had spent months preparing for this special day, setting up the nursery, picking out tiny clothes, and imagining what his face would look like in her arms. Yet, none of these moments would come to pass. Instead, On November 25, 2020, her family would set an extra place at the table for someone who would never return home. At 4 p.m., the first emergency call arrived. A neighbor on a street in Mount Morris, Illinois, reported thick black smoke billowing from a small house. The fire alarm was ringing inside, but no one came to answer the door. Multiple fire crews arrived at the scene within minutes. Thick smoke pouring from the roof engulfed the air around the house, yet the flames weren't visible from the street. Firefighters quickly forced their way inside, navigating through the dense smoke. They checked the living room, but found nothing. The hallway was empty as well. Then, in the kitchen, they discovered her, a woman lying motionless on the floor near the stove. It was Melissa Lamesh, an EMT who was 9 months pregnant and expected to give birth in just 2 days. At that moment, no one knew this. From the very beginning, something about the situation felt off. She wasn't hurt. She didn't have soot on her. There were none of the usual signs that someone had died in a house fire on her. What had really happened? Melissa Lamesh wasn't like any other 27-year-old. People took notice of her because she had fire inside her, the kind of person who wouldn't give in or settle down. She was shy as a child, but that never stopped her from going after her goals. By the time she was in high school, she couldn't be stopped. She was highly independent, set on making something of herself, and always ready to stand her ground. She went to a lot of different community schools while she tried to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. Then something made sense. She had a medical emergency one night and had to go to the emergency room. The way the paramedics handled her changed everything. She wished she were that person. She wanted people to be able to trust her when things were bad. That's how she became an EMT. Not just any EMT, but one who was good at her job. She was the type to take on the hard jobs, the late nights, and the calls that no one else wanted. By 2020, she had added one more word to her name, Mom. Melissa didn't think she would have to raise her kids by herself. Matthew Plode, the father of her child, made it clear that he didn't want anything to do with the pregnancy. She didn't let that stop her, though. Bradley was the name she chose for her son, and she made sure everything was ready for him to come home. Her family also helped. Dina Lamesh, her mother, told her, "You don't need him. We're yours. We'll help you with anything you need." Melissa thought that too. She wasn't scared. She was all set. But she was found dead in her own home 2 days before she was supposed to hug her son for the first time. Smoke filled the air. The fire didn't look very big at first. It hadn't taken over the whole house. The fire hadn't gone through the walls or the roof. Mainly, it had stayed in the kitchen. Simply, that sent up red flags. Whenever a fire starts, it moves from room to room and burns everything in its way. But what about this fire? That seemed to contain it. There was a sense of purpose to it. A team of detectives from the Illinois State Fire Marshal's office arrived at the scene while firefighters worked. What they had to do was figure out where the fire began and if it was an accident or something else. The source was quickly found to be a cabinet above the stove. That wasn't normal. Most kitchen fires begin on the stove with a pan left unchecked, a grease fire, or a hob left on for too long. In this case, though, the stove was turned off. Not using the oven, there are no signs of a burning grease. Not any electricity problems, absolutely nothing. Only one thing was left to think about. Someone had started the fire on purpose. Then the most important question came up. Melissa wasn't like everyone else. She received training as an EMT. She had been in dozens of emergencies, been inside buildings that were on fire, and saved other people from dangerous situations, but she never got out of her own house when it caught fire. There were 3 ways out of the room within 20 feet, a front door, a back door, and a window. There was no movement from her. She kept walking. She never attempted to leave. In other words, something happened to her before the fire broke out. Now the police had to figure out what. An awful phone call started Melissa's family's nightmare. Carol's brother, Carl, called. His tone of voice was crazy, and he was talking too fast for his mother, Dina Lamesh, to understand. "Has Melissa called you?" Although it was an odd question, Dina didn't give it much thought at first. That night was Thanksgiving Eve. Melissa had been busy getting ready for the holiday, possibly doing chores or taking it easy before her big trip to the hospital on Friday morning. Carl didn't think twice about it. "My neighbor called. It's burning in Gus's house." A sudden heavy weight in Dina's chest shocked her. There wasn't much meaning in the words. Melissa was meant to be at home with her baby, not stuck in a house on fire. Though as more calls came in, it became more clear. Melissa had been missing. She was not seen by anyone. No one was sure if she was free. Dina's world fell apart at that moment. In just a few minutes, the fire chief told the mother something she should never have to hear. Her daughter was dead. Also gone was Barrett, Melissa's unborn child, who was due in 48 hours. After the Lamesh family lost their loved one, the next 24 hours were a blur of shock, confusion, and painful sadness. Melissa's dad, Gus, was not in town and had no idea what had happened. He didn't believe it when he finally got the call. He couldn't have possibly done that. In good health, his daughter was young and strong. Getting pregnant made her so happy. This was not meant to happen. That was followed by Thanksgiving dinner. Even though the family was together, nothing seemed real. Nicole's sister, Cassie, was still waiting for a text or call to let her know that everything was a mistake. Later, as everyone sat down at the table, someone noticed something. Melissa had an extra plate already there. They hadn't even known they did it. They had set up a spot for her, like she was still expected to walk in the door, sit down, laugh, and talk about how excited she was for Barrett to arrive, although she would never go through that door again. And then Melissa was due to give birth on Friday morning, but her mother had to make another call. She dialed 911, the person who was waiting for Melissa to be induced. Melissa isn't going to come. Suddenly, the nurse on the other end stopped talking, and it happened to Dina again. Melissa had not only died, but her whole life had been taken away. Her nephew's child would never wake up. He would never be warm like his mother. This wasn't just a sad event. The act was illegal. Eventually, the medical report would show that it was true. People normally die in house fires either from getting burned or breathing in the smoke. But it didn't take long for the doctor to figure out that Melissa's death wasn't caused by a normal fire. Not at all. It wasn't a fire death. It was clean in Melissa's lungs, not any soot. No damage from smoke. There was no sign that she was breathing when the fire started. The amount of carbon monoxide in her body was fine. In other words, she hadn't died. Why did that happen? Then they found something else. There was another story in her body, one that didn't start with a fire. Around her eyes and neck, there were petechial hemorrhages, which are small blood vessels that had burst. The muscles in her throat are badly bruised. There are signs of a fight. The most important hint is DNA found under her nails. She had fought back Melissa. This wasn't a mistake. This was not a medical emergency. It was crime. The fire made sense at that moment. Someone had started it to hide their tracks. Someone killed Melissa first, and then set the fire to get rid of the proof. The police now had one question. Who saw Melissa last while she was still alive? The police went right to Melissa's family. They needed to know every name, every word, and every detail. That's when they learned something very scary. Melissa was on the phone when someone called her. Just hours before she died, she talked to her sister Cassie. She looked out the window and saw someone in the middle of their talk there. "Matthew's here again," Melissa told Cassie the last time she spoke to her. "Please tell him to stop." After that, the call was over. Cassie thought her sister would call her right back. She never did, though. The cops now knew their first name, which was Matthew Plote, a firefighter, as an EMT, a man who had learned how to save lives. More importantly, though, he is the father of Melissa's future child, a man who had been lying about her pregnant for 9 months earlier, a man who told her to get rid of the baby and then avoided her when she didn't, a man who kept showing up without warning even after Melissa told him to stop. He was the last person to see her living. The day before Thanksgiving, the police dug in. There were phone records, surveillance videos, and work plans that they got. They were scared by what they found. On the day of the fire, Plote had called in sick. He had no excuse. It looked like he didn't want to be tracked because he left his phone at home. When police asked him about it, he admitted that he had been at Melissa's house that day. He agreed that they did talk about the baby. He also said he left before the fire began. But was that really true? As more proof came in, it became clear that Melissa Lamesh never had a chance to get out of that fire. She wasn't there when it began because she had already left. Matthew Plote had been alive for 33 years and had become very good at hiding things. At first glance, he looked like a normal firefighter or paramedic, someone who was trained to save lives, not take them, someone who was always on time for work, did their job without complaining, and kept their personal life from the people they worked with. There were secrets behind that well-kept picture, though. Melanie Lamesh had been one of them for almost 10 years. They had been friends for a long time. Not even a friendship. It wasn't love. Matt thought it was just an on-again, off-again hookup that never turned into anything serious. But in April 2020, all of a sudden, There was a baby. Melissa was thrilled, maybe even scared, but thrilled. She was aware it would be tough. It was going to be hard for her, but she was ready to be a mom. On the other hand, Matt was very angry. He didn't want anything to do with it from the moment she told him. You need to get rid of the kid. That was his first thought. He wasn't kind about it. He did not ask. What she should do was what he said. Melissa said no. She was going to have the baby with or without him. Matthew ran away when he realized he couldn't change what was happening. She couldn't reach him through texts or calls anymore. He shut her out totally. Melissa had not heard from him in months. She wouldn't let him act like their baby didn't exist, though. She did something he didn't expect. She went right to his dad and mom. She went right up to their house, knocked on the door, and told them everything. Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm having your son's child. Soon, you'll have grandchildren. She told them when the baby would be born and showed them pictures from the scan. It was clear that this baby was real even if Matthew didn't want to be involved. What about Matt? He lost it. He was furious when he learned what she had done. She told her family that he was mad at her for telling them the truth. He had been hiding his double life for months, taking great care of his status at work and in his personal relationships. His parents now knew. Things were starting to fall apart. After that, he started showing up without telling anyone, not invited. Melissa told her sister Cassie that he had been showing up at her house without warning. He must stop. He didn't stop, though. He knocked on her door one last time, 2 days before she was due to give birth. Detectives already knew a lot when they brought Matthew Plote in to talk to them. He was the last person to see Melissa alive. They knew that. No one could say he had an excuse. He had called in sick that day, so they knew he should have been at that house. He didn't try to hide it when they put him across from them in the questioning room. Yes, I was there, he told her right away. He told them he had only dropped by to discuss the baby, which seemed normal enough. Matt said it was just a casual conversation. They talked about money and visitation. He mentioned that the idea of becoming a father was starting to feel more real to him. After their talk, he left. As he was leaving, he saw her standing by the microwave, warming up some food. That was the last time he saw her. His account sounded straightforward and honest, with nothing suspicious. Except it wasn't true. Because this wouldn't make sense if Melissa was still alive and well when he left. Why did she not answer any more texts? She said she would call Cassie back, so why didn't she? Why did the investigation show that she was already dead when the fire began? The most important question is why Matthew left his phone at home that day. Detectives had already confirmed that, so he hadn't just forgotten about it. There was no mistake. He forgot to bring it with him. That's not something people do unless they want to be watched. At first, the police let Matthew talk. They were interested in how he went, if he got nervous, and if he stumbled over his words. Things they saw that were even scarier were that he wasn't nervous. He wasn't mad. He had no feelings. It looked like he was talking about the weather as he sat there and answered their questions. Someone from the police force then asked the important question, "Did you plan this?" Matthew paused for the first time. A half-second break was all that could be seen, but it wasn't enough. He said, "I never meant to hurt her. Not I did not do it. Not that's not the right guy. Not this is crazy. That's not something I would ever do. Just say, I didn't mean to hurt her." There was silence in the room. The police officer leaned in. So it was a mistake. One more stop. Yes, that was it. There was no way they could have come close to confessing after that. Matthew Plote wasn't just answering questions for the first time in that whole conversation. He was telling the truth. As soon as he said that word, police knew they were looking at the person who killed Melissa Lamesh. It was now up to them to prove it. Detectives had already seen that Matthew Plote could keep big secrets, but they were about to find out how far he had gone to keep up his double life. Plote was with someone else, a woman named Katie, while Melissa was getting ready to give birth to their child. Katie had been seeing Plote for months, but she had no idea that he was going to have a baby. She had no idea that Plote was in the house of the woman who was having his child just 2 days before his son was due to be born. As the detectives dug deeper, they put together a picture of what happened that night. Plote had planned to break up with Katie not sometime in the future, but on the night of the murder itself. That little thing changed everything. It meant that he wasn't just getting rid of Melissa. He was starting over. He had ignored the pregnancy for months, trying to avoid taking blame and acting like it wasn't there. Melissa did something he couldn't stop, though. And after telling her the truth, he couldn't just leave. What if instead of leaving, he chose to get rid of the whole problem? He wasn't being asked for anything by Melissa. She wasn't going to court. She wasn't asking for child support, and she wasn't making him become a dad. She only wanted Barrett to meet his family. That wasn't good enough for Plote, though. He meant for Melissa to be killed, and if he planned it well, it would look like an accident. But that's not all. As soon as police knew Katie's name, they looked at his phone records. What they found made one thing very clear. Plote had been living two lives at once. She was killed so that it wouldn't fall apart. There was already a lot of forensic proof against him, but the police weren't done yet. They had to find more. And when they got a warrant to search Plote's house, they did. They found some odd things in his trash, like rubber gloves, a pink Bic lighter, and a Fitbit. They didn't seem like much on their own, but when put together, they made a bigger picture. Things get even worse for Plote now. The fiery accelerant used to start the fire worked perfectly with the pink Bic lighter he found in his trash. The rubber gloves showed that he was trying to hide his tracks. After that, there was the Fitbit. Fitbits don't just keep track of steps. They also keep track of moving, your heart rate, and the time. Now that detectives had a possible timestamp for when Plote was physically present, all they had to do was match it to the timeline of the fire. Every minute, it became clearer. Melissa wasn't the only person Plote killed. He also cleaned up after himself. He had this planned. The more the police looked into it, the worse it got. The police had a lot of forensic and circumstantial proof by this point, but they still wanted Plote's own words. That's when Chief Rob Schultz stepped in. Plote wasn't just a suspect. He worked as a firefighter too. He also had a boss at the Carroll Stream Fire District. This man had known him for years, trusted him with life and death choices, and thought he was someone who wanted to save people, not hurt them. So when officials came up to Chief Schultz and asked him to do something strange, he was shocked. He was told to wear a wire. These people asked him to talk to Plote one-on-one as a firefighter to another. At first, Schultz wasn't sure. This is not what a fire chief was taught to do. Putting out fires was all he did. He didn't question people. He thought about Melissa after that. He thought about the child she was making. He also thought about how Plote had been walking around freely for almost a year. He agreed then. Everything was set up properly on the day of the surgery. Schultz called Plote and asked him to come in for a meeting. It wasn't anything important or suspicious. It was just a friendly chat, and Plote didn't know that the whole firehouse had been cleaned out when he got there. Police were listening in from outside the room, but he had no idea. Like he had done 100 times before, he just sat down next to his boss and laughed. Schultz wasn't too tough. Not an accusation. He told Plote that this was just a conversation between coworkers instead. Schultz said, "I just want to know what happened. Tell me what you know." Plote didn't move. He did not respond. That was the first red flag. He would have fought back because he was a good man. "This is crazy," he would have said. "This had nothing to do with me." Instead, Plote did nothing but sit there and listen, not saying a word. Never ever did he say otherwise. Schultz didn't have to say much at the end of the meeting. "You're not allowed to go back to work." Plote just gave a nod. That was the end of his time as a fireman, but he was also running out of time as a free man. The next time Plote sat down to talk, it wouldn't be with his fire chief because police were closing in. It would be with a judge. Matthew Plote was free for 469 days. He went about his daily life as if nothing had happened. He worked part-time and fit in with everyone else, acting like he had nothing to worry about. Detectives in Melissa's family had not forgotten, though. They didn't want her case to go cold, so they waited and pushed. On March 9th, 2022, their long wait finally paid off. Police pulled up in front of a small office block in Malta, Illinois that morning. Plote had been working part-time at an insurance business there. He had no idea what was going to happen. It was too late for him to react when he saw the police walking towards him. "Get ready to be arrested, Matthew Plote." They didn't have to say why. He knew already. Plote was charged with murder in the first degree, killing an unborn child on purpose, aggravated hiding the body of a murder victim, and setting fire to property. The $10 million bail number made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. Plote, on the other hand, never did anything. He didn't get angry, complain, or desperately say he was innocent. He just stared with his blank face. Someone must have felt bad at some point, but no one saw it. It had been more than 3 years since Melissa and Barrett's deaths by the time March 18th, 2024 came around. 3 years of waiting, having questions, and asking if justice would ever be done. But right now, 12 people on a jury in Ogle County, Illinois were about to decide what would happen to Matthew Plote. The government didn't waste any time. They told a story that was based on facts. Plote had a reason. He meant to get rid of Melissa and the baby. He choked her, lit the fire, and then left. There were bruises on her throat, which were clear signs that she had been strangled. Since there was no soot in her lungs, she had already died when the fire began. DNA found under her nails showed that she fought back. The lawyers then played the tape of the 7-hour interview in which Plote sat with his eyes closed and gave truncated answers while refusing to say that what had happened was not true. And most importantly, his one mistake, "I never meant to hurt her," he said, then asked, "So it was an accident?" Yes. That word hung in the air like an admission. The defense did have its own plan, though. They said that Plote was being lied to and that the police had been biased from the start and never looked into any other options seriously. They called in retired firefighter John Knapp to say that the study into the fire was not clear-cut. They said that Gus, Melissa's dad, or a past boyfriend should have been looked into. They said that the fire wasn't definitely started on purpose and that the lawyers were making up facts to fit their story. And finally, they said that Plote wasn't a killer just because he was cold and heartless. It was a weak case, but was it strong enough to make people doubt? But it only took the jury 2 hours to go through 3 years' worth of evidence, 2 weeks' worth of testimony, 7 hours of recorded questioning, and one cold, emotionless defendant. As the decision was read, there was silence in the courtroom. We, the jury, decide that Matthew Plote is guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of killing an unborn child on purpose. You are guilty of serious battery, arson on their hands, and guilty of hiding the fact that someone had been killed. Plote's face didn't show any shock. Don't worry. Don't beg for forgiveness. Her family, on the other hand, cried in the balcony because justice had been done. It didn't feel like a win, though. After 3 months, on June 27, 2024, Matthew Plote finally went in front of the judge. He got life in jail for this crime, but he still didn't show any feeling. It had been 3 years since Melissa's family had lost someone they could never talk about. They fought and waited for justice, but when it finally came, it didn't feel like enough. In the end, justice could only punish those who were wrong. It could never take back what was done. It would never be able to bring Melissa back or give Barrett the life he was meant to have. They were sad, but that didn't make them give up. They made it better. Instead of getting angry, they decided to remember Melissa and Barrett in a way that would last. Barrett's family started giving to local homes in his honor, which gave other moms who were having a hard time the help Melissa never got from Plote. All the baby stuff she bought for her son, but never used, was given to other moms who needed it. Because Barrett couldn't have the life he wanted, he might have been able to help another child get theirs. That wasn't all, though. Melissa had always loved the holidays because of the warmth and tradition they brought. But there was one place she loved even more, a nearby park. She spent countless hours there under the trees, taking in the quiet and finding peace in the changing seasons. So now, every holiday season, that same park lights up a tree in her honor. It's just one bright light in the darkness, standing tall and steady, just like she always had been. But even as her family built these shrines, there was still one question that no one could quite answer. What could have been done to stop this? Because there were signs when I looked back. Everyone knew Melissa was telling the truth. When she said that Plote was unstable, angry about the pregnancy, and had started showing up without warning, but no one thought it would end up this way. How do you spot danger before it's too late? That's the real question. Melissa saw the warning signs, but she didn't think they would kill her. Now, her story serves as a powerful lesson, one about control, obsession, and the consequences of choosing to erase a problem rather than confront it. Matthew Plote had other options. He could have walked away. He could have accepted reality, moved on with his life, and let Melissa live hers. Instead, he took everything from her. In the end, he took his own life. Those who knew Melissa and Barrett will always remember them, but Matthew Plote will be remembered for nothing else. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.